This weekend's Labor has its annual conference, and after a few rocky years, COVID, inflation, the cost of living crisis, and most recently all the Gaurav Sharma drama, it's been reflected in the numbers. In the most recent One News Kantar public poll, support for Labor was sitting at just 34%. That's 3 points below national. So this weekend they'll be looking to get back on track. For more on what we can expect to be on the agenda, I'm joined now by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's former Chief of Staff, Neil Jones, here in Auckland, alongside political commentator Josie Pagani. Thanks both for being with me this morning. I thought if I could just start with both of you, what would you grade Labor at the moment? Give them a bit of a report card. Josie, shall we start with you in Wellington?
I think I'd say, if I was a teacher writing a report, I'd say must improve. Those polls are not good, and they know that. They'll be looking to this conference to really reset the conversation. Where I think they've done well, if I was going to say something positive, is on the attack on National, and you'd have to say National has left itself open for that. I mean, an $11 billion hole, promising a tax cut to the top 10%, or primarily, I think half of it goes to the top 10%. National have left themselves open for that, and Labor have done a good job of saying, look, we're in an economic time where you cannot get away with that kind of economic incoherence. Look at Liz Truss. So that they've done well on that side of it, but the where they really need to improve is they've got to reset the conversation, say something about cost of living, say something about immigration, about crime, and then they might stand a chance of lifting those polls that you just showed.
Thanks, Josie. Neil, and what would your grade be?
Yeah, look, I agree. I think on the substance, we've come through a pandemic and the worst economic crisis in 100 years. So on the substance, I think we're looking pretty good. I'd say a sort of a 7 or 8 out of 10. But on the politics, I think they've really struggled lately. And I think I agree with Josie. This is an opportunity, this conference, to really reset the conversation a bit. I think we've seen over the last couple of weeks Labor start to draw contrast with National a lot more. I think this conference will start to see them roll out some of their election messaging. And I think we'll see a focus a lot more on family budgets, the economy, and sort of drawing that contrast and saying, look, Labor, will back low and middle income families. We may well see some policy in that area. And contrast that with National and say, well, you've got a party that talks about cost of living, but wants to give $6 billion to landlords, property speculators, and the top few percent of income earners. And I think that kind of contrast is important, because if the election's a referendum on has the government fixed inflation, well, no government in the world has done that. No government can ultimately undo what is a global economic issue. But if they can make it a choice between two pathways, I think they have a chance. And that's why I think we'll start to see roll out this conference.
Would you agree with that, Josie? I feel like, reading a lot of commentary that their policies, they haven't resonated with the public as well as they would have liked, would they? And I mean, particularly with Three Waters. So how do you kind of change the narrative?
Yeah, I think one thing you've got to do is actually either jettison or reframe some of those unpopular policies. So, take something on the chin about Three Waters and come up with something that looks like you've listened and you've moved on. You're right. I think they need to focus on stuff that will be popular. And Neil's right. That will be stuff around, what is the cost, my weekly budget? What are you going to do to help me? What are you going to do about mortgages, which will come up, which will be really tough next year. So a really interesting poll I saw from YouGov over about 11 countries, very similar to New Zealand, ones that we usually follow, show that voters have a real appetite for change, right? So voters are saying they want governments to chuck the kitchen sink at cost of living stuff, at inflation, even to the extent where, they may revisit things like, if you can keep prices down by taxing wealthier people a little bit more, we support that. So a whole lot of stuff that I think Labor needs to kind of find its mojo and take a few risks, because 5 years ago capital gains tax might not have been popular. I think there's a lot more scope and appetite for that now, because people want to see some change. They want something that's going to help them in the pocket.
So how hard does it make it, Neil, for Jacinda Ardern, who I guess rode in, you were her Chief of Staff then when she became Prime Minister, but a lot of people are saying a little bit of the magic's gone there. So is it going to be quite challenging heading into this next election?
It's always harder when you've had 2 terms in government to make the case for a third, because you are judged on your record. And so I think there does have to be a real defence of that record, but also a sense that there is still energy in the tank and some ideas for the future. I think a lot of New Zealanders, as much as COVID is still with us, a lot of people sort of want to see that in the rearview mirror and ask, what's next? Where do we go from here? How are you going to deal with the economy, cost of living? And I think Labour needs to show it's still got ideas and it's still got energy.
Would you expect to see some big policies coming out this weekend?
It's hard to say. I expect we'll see some policy. I think it would be wise to do something reasonably substantial to help shift the narrative, but we've still got the budget next year and we've still got an election campaign to go, so there's still some time to go.
Yeah. Josie, I was just wondering, you were talking before, or you mentioned not a lot of marketing. What does that, about the conference, what does that tell you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, New Zealand doesn't have a tradition like the US or even the UK of kind of, balloons and confetti and creating a big circus around party conferences. But there hasn't been much lead up to this. There hasn't been much sense of an excitement or that something exciting might be announced. I don't necessarily think that's a negative, but I think come the weekend, they do need to come up with some really practical policies that will address, cost of living, what are you going to do to help me, but also something on crime. And they need to just shift, I think, the conversation from this is a government that, hasn't implemented the bollards for raids, it's only done 7 shops and so on. Whether, whatever the facts around that narrative is really stuck, that the government's not delivering. So it needs to shift the conversation from poor implementation to great ideas, stuff that will really shift the dial on cost of living. And voters will support that, I have no doubt, looking at that YouGov polling across 11 countries.
Neil, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think what the government has to do a lot more of is retail politics. I think a lot of what it's been focused on has been big reform pieces that are important, but probably won't see benefits for years. Things like health reforms, Three Waters, the TVNZ-RNZ merger. I think a lot more focus on just real bread and butter retail politics that makes a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. How important are these party conferences when they happen, particularly in the lead up to an election year?
I think they're important for 2 reasons. The first is that there's just the business of the conference, which is party members building up the manifesto for the election, getting energised, ready to actually campaign and fight. But also it's an opportunity, a rare opportunity in politics for a political party to have a weekend where it just gets to talk about its priorities. Clear out a lot of the other issues that it gets bogged down in and just say this is what we stand for and where we're going.
And I think you would both expect to see a reset of some form, do you think, at this party conference?
I think we'll see a lot more focus on the election and on contrasting Labour and National and really giving New Zealanders a sense that there is a path that Labour's going to go down and a path National's going to go down, and tell New Zealanders, actually, we've got the ideas and the vision.
Would you agree with that, Josie?
Yeah, I mean, look, if there wasn't a conference coming up this weekend, they'd have to invent one. They need a big event where they can showcase themselves and look like they've got the energy and their campaign mojo back, and especially after this week of the debacle at Hamilton West with the candidate there who was, joining a protest, or says she wasn't, but, was in the protest when Health Minister Andrew Little was there. It shows you that they haven't got a campaign set up for a big by-election that's going to have national focus on it. So I think we need to see a party that's got a campaign machine going, that's excited about the election, that's got something tangible and practical to say to voters. They need this conference.
Josie Bigani, political commentator in Wellington, and Neil Jones, former Labour Chief of Staff here in Auckland. Ngā mihi nui. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.